Welcome. We're just waiting for people to arrive. If you're just joining us, we're just waiting for others to arrive, and we'll get started in about a minute. We will be starting very soon. Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for others to arrive. All right, I think we're ready to go. So thank you for joining us on the live stream, and thank you for joining us to those who are streaming us on demand. And a special thank you to Access Partnership for the opportunity to lead today's discussion on AI in healthcare. So I'm Kayleen Brown. I've been covering the medical device industry for over 15 years. I'm currently the managing editor for Device Talks, and I have the privilege of telling MedTech stories through various platforms, from podcasts to global conferences. I'm also the proud co-host of a new series coming out next month called Life Sci AI, where we talk about the collaboration of AI and into the life sciences to better health outcomes. So please connect with me on LinkedIn so you know when we go live. And an invitation to today's panelists to join me on that show. We would love to hear your insights and continue the conversation. So on to the fun stuff. Our objective today is very clear. We want to foster dialogue, collaboration, and a deeper understanding of AI's transformative role into healthcare to better contribute to a more responsible and impactful integration of healthcare and AI. So before we dive in, I'd like to first thank each of our esteemed panelists for joining us and ask you to introduce yourself. So let's start with Melissa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Govender, and I lead Access Partnership's AI Policy Lab. We created our AI Policy Lab earlier this year to have discussions like the one we're having today, where we could talk about what AI means and what its impact on society would be. We've also discussed AI, the EU AI Act and copyright, and also the ethical use of AI and what principles should be adopted. For me personally, I think AI can be transformative in the healthcare sector. I give a case study which I think explains it in a very simple way. In Nigeria, there's an app called Ubenwa, and Ubenwa uses an algorithm to make a distinction between the cry of a healthy baby and the cry of a baby who has restricted blood and oxygen flow to its brain. The app has been endorsed by the World Health Organization. And for me, that crystallizes how AI can be used in developing countries in remote areas to really transform society.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melissa. And that's a wonderful case study. So I'll be following up with you shortly to learn more about that. Let's shift over. Mike.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Mike Bales. I've variously been an engineer and a management consultant, but I've been with Roche for the past 10 years in the commercial organization and the clinical trials organization, and increasingly working with AI technologies, digital health technologies, to look at how they can positively impact patient care, research, business operations, all sorts of applications. I'm really excited about just the ability for AI to augment the ability to make confident decisions when put into context and properly designed.
Confident decisions, fantastic. Welcome. Dr. Magesh.
Yeah, hi, this is Dr. Magesh from Wipro. I work at Wipro for almost 20 years and 25 years in IT industry. So basically, I'm a technologist by practice, researcher by passion, and innovator by profession. So that's my background, and I did my PhD in genetic algorithms and deep learning.
Excellent, thank you. And last but not least, Var.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Kayleen, for moderating this important conversation. And thank you to Melissa, to Luca, and to the Access Partnership team for having us and for convening us. My name is Var Shankar. I am the Director of Policy at the Responsible AI Institute, a corporate lawyer by background. And as a civil society organization, the Responsible AI Institute convenes and collaborates closely with other nonprofits, with industry, with academic researchers, and with policymakers to develop assessments and tools for responsible AI implementation. So we see AI in healthcare as one of the most promising areas in terms of positive impact in improving people's lives and health, and also in public health. And we also see major issues in terms of privacy, consent, ethical issues, and equity issues that we will need to address and build the ability to address on an ongoing basis. So really excited to jump into the conversation here.
Excellent, thank you and welcome. So as all of our viewers on demand or live can see, we have a diverse group of panelists who will be talking about this from all the different facets of life sciences and healthcare. But let's start with a 40,000 foot view. So Mike, I'm going to ask you first, with Roche's extensive reach in healthcare, what role do you see AI in addressing global health challenges? And before you answer that question, I understand how broad and how vague it is, but I'd like to start there. So what role do you see AI in addressing global health challenges?
Yeah, I mean, speaking to the breadth, if you have a lot of data, then AI is probably going to be of some help to help you sort through that. I think fundamentally, I mean, COVID crisis was a great example of highlighting where AI had a lot of potential to, and did, in some cases, have a lot of impact, but there could have been more, right? Tons of data out there about all the issues with the spread of the virus, new variants emerging, different response to approaches to treatment. And where AI can really shine is all of that data spread around the world. If you can find a way to funnel it into the appropriate tools and applications, then you can really understand a lot faster signals and identify a lot faster some of the signals of the potential harms or spread of the illness or new outbreaks and so on. I think one of the highlights was at the very outbreak at the very beginning of the COVID crisis was called by a company here in Toronto called Blue Dot. It was using some AI applications and a whole bunch of various online data sources to track unusual trends that might be predictive of the outbreak of disease. And so they were one of the first ones to really call out to the public health sector and governments to say, hey, we think there's something emerging here. And so I think that was a great example of its potential.
Excellent. So that already inspired me for 3 new questions, but since we are very limited on time, I won't ask those 3 questions, but I will say to our watchers and our listeners that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat feature on YouTube. You can directly submit your questions into the chat. And if we can't get to the questions during the Q&A later today, I'm sure all of the panelists wouldn't mind responding at another time, and Access Partnership will accommodate that. So kind of going from what you were saying, Mike, I'd like to hear a different perspective. Melissa, that giant question, what role do you see AI in addressing global health challenges?
So I think Mike's done a great job describing the fact that data can be used to predict when diseases occur and when they might occur. I think another really interesting application is how AI can be used for creating vaccines. So we saw with the creation of the COVID-19 vaccine that AI was used there. I think one of the really interesting case studies I've come across, and I'm sure many people are familiar with it, is DeepMind's AlphaFold, which basically looks at protein structures and then can actually predict how a vaccine would react based on those different protein structures. It's now open source, so everyone has access to it, and it's going to definitely be used to help, I think, with all sorts of health issues or concerns that we have into the future. So I think that's, for me, the fact that AI can help with disease control, with vaccines, with us understanding and predicting things. And I think also what's really interesting about the use of AI is it decreases the time that's required and the money that is required in creating these vaccines, because it's just using analytics to see how things would play out. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting use cases.
It's a great use case. And what I heard you say specifically was access. So I think part of our conversation is not just talking about AI and how it's integrated in healthcare and how it can be integrated, but how everybody can access that to better health outcomes. So, Dr. Magesh, I'd like to dive in a bit deeper with you. With your background in deep learning and genetic algorithms, how do you envision these technologies enhancing efficiency and personalization in healthcare?
Yeah, so what I specifically see from AI with healthcare combination is AI helps you to be more proactive in nature, to react to situations by doing some predictive analytics on disease outbreaks, for example, or faster processing of medical imaging, and using of radiomics for any image processing, or doing things with electronic health records. So everything more proactive in nature and react to it very faster as compared to some manual processes. So that's the important aspect that I can see with AI. Although we think AI only from the automation perspective, we have to think AI also from a composite AI perspective, because AI with a combination of alternate technologies, the new gen technologies, for example, AI with data, which is your predictive analytics, AI with cloud, which is your industrial cloud solutions from AWS, Azure, or GCP. So this kind of composite AI technologies will really help healthcare life sciences to create some address some new gen solutions better with the AI services.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, I have a couple of examples. Like one which Mike explained about the COVID, right? I have a practical example where I have seen during this COVID outbreak in various parts of the countries, people have some issues in visiting the doctor's place, or for any consultation or things like that. So using some kind of remote assistance, virtual assistance, and kind of health enabled bot assistant would really have been helping them to handle simple consultation for any patient. So for example, it may be minor issues that they don't want to visit physically to hospitals, but they want to get some consultations from experts through remote assisting AI services. So that's one example. Another example, again from the COVID situation, is when there are large number of test results, lab results to be processed, the AI really helps them. For example, on the CT scan or any image processing, to really help them to identify if there is an anomaly in the patient's health, or if there is anything that we have to be really careful in understanding the patient's situation, and alarming in patient's situation, and take the next step in their in their treatment. So these are some of the examples that I have practically seen in last 2-3 years with respect to the new age AI solutions.
Great, thank you. I'm hearing access again. Great example, which leads me actually to Mike. So Dr. Magesh's example, his second example, makes me think of clinical trials, which is more near and dear to actually my experience and my heart. How is Roche leveraging AI and machine learning to tackle the challenges in clinical trials, and have you seen any advancements?
Absolutely. I mean, the similar challenge with clinical trials is patients can be anywhere, and how do you make sure that you can ensure the access to clinical trials that people should have? And embedded in that is ensuring the diversity of populations that are incorporated into clinical trials. And historically, a lot of clinical trial recruitment centers have been large hospitals in urban centers, and it's not always the most representative population around those centers. So how do you model populations to figure out where you can better ensure the diversity of inclusion into your clinical trials, so they're properly representative of the population that can benefit from new therapy. On top of that, clinical trials are a huge time and expense, and so there's all sorts of opportunity for just automation of the process. So summarization of information and supporting the identification of reported adverse events and safety incidents from clinician notes. There's a big opportunity to just shorten the amount of time required to pull all that information together and summarize it, so that the reports can be effectively analyzed and the results reviewed. There's a couple examples, and actually, one thing I should throw in there as well is the digital health technologies that are starting to really complement clinical trials as well, and the ability to observe patients outside of just the clinical setting. I think that's a really interesting one, where you get a much broader, a much greater breadth of information coming back from patients when you're able to include devices that sort of go with them outside of their time when they're directly in clinic, to give you additional insights into what might be going on, or potential biomarkers that can be tracked to indicate response, or side effects or adverse events that you need to be aware of, to better understand the risk profile and the benefit profile of therapies.
We can do another session just on that statement alone. So I will be following up with you, Mike, and I do hope that you join me on LifeSci AI, because I have a few studies that I was reading that I want to pick your brain on. I wanted us to kind of start big and broad, and now we're going to narrow down. But before doing so, did anybody have anything else that they wanted to add on kind of the broader scale, how AI and machine learning can integrate in healthcare?
I mean, I should throw in that no one has mentioned ChatGPT yet, which is shocking. One of the first things out, and which I struggle with, because it's a huge, important innovation, the ability for large language models and these new technologies to have a transformative impact on a lot of things. But it's just one aspect of all of the capabilities that come through with AI. But I think it's really interesting how that's shifting business processes. It's shifting how you think about the time allocation of people and resources inside hospitals and healthcare. And so, what does that mean for your ability to deliver better healthcare, when you've got the support of automated services to take on some of these tasks that potentially people shouldn't be spending their time doing? They're better spending their time in direct patient care. And so I think the language-based technologies, and the ability to scan huge volumes of documents, and structure them down to something that is intelligible and digestible by clinicians and patients, I think will be a huge boon for the ability to deliver high quality healthcare, much more broadly than just the best healthcare centers out there.
Well said. And I hate to sound like a broken record, Mike, but again, access. So generative AI, I mean, it allows the people like me to really understand the power of generative AI and improve our efficiency, so that we have more time to be human and have that human-to-human interaction, which I'm sure we're going to dig into later, a little bit later. So Var, now it's time to talk about governance. Can you share some of the tools and policy interventions developed to support the responsible use of AI in healthcare?
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. I think broadly, there are two ways that we look at this issue. The first is to monitor the landscape of AI in healthcare. There's a lot of great research being done. There's new regulations on the horizon, including horizontal and vertical regulations. And so, and then there's, of course, practitioner insights that are super valuable as well. So we build trackers, we organize research, but what we find to be the most effective in monitoring the landscape is building community spaces and working groups and task forces, because that way you have give and take among people coming at AI in healthcare from different perspectives, organic collaboration, and you build trust over time. So yeah, monitoring is a really important part of it. The other piece is identifying impacts within specific use cases. So convening a group around a specific use case, it can be something like, at the level of detecting skin disease by smartphone, or transcribing conversations between physicians and patients. So something kind of that everybody in the group understands, and convene a group of experts around it, identify specific impacts in a specific context, work through them together, and then arrive at what you think is a repeatable approach to that use case, which you can then document and share learnings from. So those are just two of the ways the most effective ways that we're kind of looking at this issue and determining what the best interventions would be.
Var, you said trust. I think that's almost as surprising to me when Mike said that we haven't talked about ChatGPT, that nobody's mentioned trust until now. Can you talk to that a little bit more and cite any specific objectives or initiatives to try to build that trust?
Yeah, so kind of at a really high level, trust in AI varies by industry. It varies by society as well, and we've seen kind of recent research that it also varies within an organization. It's executives are more likely to trust in AI than people, frontline people who are working with AI systems. And then in the healthcare context, you also have, a really group of specialized organizations, which are, the people whose data is shared and the people whose lives are impacted are trusting, their healthcare system, which is a lot of complex organizations sharing data, and kind of there are issues around privacy, there are issues around consent, kind of embedded in every interaction that somebody has with the healthcare system. And so that's why it's really important to get it right, because, Mike mentioned ChatGPT. There's tremendous potential to cut through the complexity and to empower people to navigate the healthcare system, if we can get it right, and if we can get calibrated right, which is a big if, and which is the challenge for us.
Hear, hear. Melissa, this is very much your realm as well. So how do you see the regulatory landscape shaping AI's integration into healthcare? And do you have any specific initiatives on the horizon?
So when I was looking at it globally, Kayleen, I think in the US, the FDA has taken kind of the lead in terms of AI medical devices and how they're regulated. And what we saw was that they make a distinction between class 1, class 2, and class 3 devices. And class 1 is kind of your what they would consider to be low risk, and that's like your glucose monitoring, just to know, what are your levels and how do you keep them in check. And then class 3, which is very high risk, will actually impact someone's life. And so it's very similar to what we see with the EU's AI Act, where it's a risk-based approach. So the more riskier the technology, the more impact it can have, and the more kind of stringent the regulation should be. And so that's the approach that we're seeing that regulators are taking. What has also been interesting to see is that it was the US, Canada, and the UK have gotten together, and they've put together some guidelines around AI and healthcare. They call them guiding principles, where they're looking at safety, they're looking at data and how it will be used. And so the principle-based approach also makes sense when we think about this is really new technology. We want to make sure that there is a balance between user safety and ensuring that innovation is allowed, and we don't want to stifle innovation. And so the principle-based approach makes sense, especially when there is, I think Var spoke to this and Mike as well, there is collaboration and discussions with governments, with policymakers, and with practitioners, so that all concerns from all stakeholders are addressed. And of course, the UK will, in November, be hosting the AI Safety Summit. And whilst it's, more broad general discussion around AI safety, I think whatever the kind of founding guidelines and principles are there, they will kind of filter down to more kind of vertical healthcare specific regulations and policies.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone else have a comment on the guiding principles? Because Melissa made a really great point. I mean, this really has rolled out relatively recently. Mike, Dr. Magesh, Var, do you have any kind of thoughts on this sort of regulation?
Right. So, with respect to these regulations, particularly on AI awareness and bias, it's a growing topic. Actually, we cannot say it is fully mature. So, when you say AI-based solutions in healthcare life science, there is a fear and there is a urge. Both are there. So, the fear is whether it is trustworthy, and the urge is whether it is giving a better experience for the users, for the end users, and how to make it, how to converge this together to make it more reliable, at the same time to make it more proactive in nature in terms of addressing all the concerns in terms of ethical guidelines, or the regulatory restrictions with respect to the geolocations, or with respect to the given regulatory body like HIPAA or FHIR or whatever it may be. So all this to be addressed. So responsible AI, explainable AI, and finally trustworthy AI is the combination that is getting matured, and it may take another probably 2 to 3 years to get to that level where we can say like we have a completely matured, or we have a more trustworthy AI solutions for healthcare life sciences.
Arguably 2 to 3 years is very, very fast in healthcare. So I hope so. Mike, I think I saw you unmute.
Did. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to watch it evolve. I think it's really important. I agree with all the tech titans that were in Washington last week that yes, it does need to be regulated. The challenge is how, because that's not a trivial question. I definitely can't answer it. I don't know that anyone can yet, but there's some really smart people out there thinking about it. I think one thing to keep in mind when you talk about healthcare is already an extremely cautious and well-regulated industry overall. Like there are guidelines and regulations in place for anything in healthcare today, and we want to make sure that as you bring AI into the mix, you don't do it in conflict with the guidelines that are already in place. Keep in mind that there's some good, robust principles and guidelines to build on top of. So, for example, you have software as a medical device requirements. So if you want to bring one of those software as a medical device to market, there's some very clear guidance from the FDA on what that entails, and the evidence and the and support, et cetera, that is required to do that. And so I think any AI regulation should really complement that work.
Very well said. I'd like to continue with you, Mike. So from a manufacturer's perspective, can you share some detail on how Roche addresses security and data and patient privacy concerns? I think it's very complementary to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, being a large drug manufacturer, we already do that well because we've been doing it forever with clinical trials and so on. So we do know how to gather patient consent, protect and structure the data in a way that absolutely protects patient privacy, and manage access to any sort of data, anonymized data before it's used in any way, so that the privacy is protected throughout the process of analyses, model development, et cetera, and it's all done in alignment with the consent that was gathered around the collection of the data. So those processes exist quite well in many organizations, and I think there's obviously going to be a learning curve for organizations coming from outside of healthcare, where that has not necessarily been a priority in the past, where you could just collect data as you wanted to and use it. And it started to shift, obviously, with GDPR and HIPAA and so on, other requirements over the past couple of decades now, I suppose. But I think AI, it does bring another level to that, though, to ensure the security as the application is being developed and used, that you continue to ensure the privacy and security of the data that's feeding into it continues to exist in the outcome of the tool, as we've seen with, I'm sure everyone's heard about the Samsung issue when the employees were sharing private company info through ChatGPT because they were exploring what they could do with the tool, and then Samsung data was coming back out the other end for other users. That's clearly a situation that you don't want to happen, and so we're aware. We've got our systems and processes in place to evaluate those risks and provide absolute governance for the data throughout the process. I'm actually pretty excited about something that's been evolving in parallel around federated learning, right, which is another technology for building models in a different way that allows you to share without sharing, right? So you, rather than move data from one person to the next and worry about the privacy and security of that data throughout. Person could be different hospitals, for example, where you have patients of a similar cohort. You instead send the modeling to those different hospitals. The model itself can learn on those data sets and then come back and they share what they've learned to augment and build a more robust model. So you get the benefit of training on a larger data set without actually moving the data. And so that's a very strong layer of security that you can add, although there are still challenges as we figure out that technology to make it certain and bulletproof. But there's some really exciting stuff that's happening on that front.
You've definitely built my confidence, so thank you for sharing that. I want to shift a little bit to blockchain, but before doing so, I see that we're already getting comments and questions. And so to our viewers, thank you very much. Continue to drop them in. We'll have a Q&A at the end. So Dr. Magesh, since you have so much experience in blockchain, the question is, how do you see this technology complementing AI to address data security challenges? Kind of like what Mike was talking about.
Yeah, so if you see with respect to blockchain and AI combination, particularly healthcare in healthcare industry, the electronic health record or EHR or electronic medical record EMR, which can be made decentralized, and it is also when we are using blockchain. It is decentralized in nature. At the same time, it is highly secure because it will be in a protective networking connections, and because of that, you can manage the patient's record in a centralized version, and at the same time, you can handle it securely across different services, and it can be broader to the larger extent. Say, for example, a unified solution of electronic health record management for the hospitals to handle remote monitoring of patients and also addressing the patients' medical and drug requirements. At the same time, it can be used for the insurance claim processing kind of activities through a centralized record management, so that we don't need to have an interfering bridge services to handle claim processing separately, or hospital related services separately, or drug related services separately. We can bring them bring all of them together as a unified service, so that blockchain can complement all these solutions into a unified integrated solution.
I would be lying if I said most of that didn't go over my head. So I can't wait to follow up with you and learn a little bit more about blockchain. I mean, I think that the more I start investigating AI, the more I realize that that is a very umbrella term. Underneath it has other technologies that can integrate and support it. So do appreciate that. I'm sure we have some questions about that. Melissa, Var, did you have anything you wanted to add in terms of data security and privacy? Let's go with Var.
No. I would love to hear from Melissa and others on this as well. I think maybe just a little more broadly on healthcare AI regulation, where you have privacy and data, and then you have kind of insights from people like Dr. Kasuthuri and Mike and other practitioners who are really deep in the field. I think those are all fairly technical and highly valued subject matter, and there's kind of a tendency to say that the experts will handle the conversations around AI in healthcare, but as Mike said, I don't think anybody has the answers to this evolving field. So I think this is a conversation that's about values, and so how do you channel values like innovation and privacy and equity through regulation in a way that's effective over time? And so I'll just say that it's really important for lawmakers to consider a variety of informed perspectives and to consult widely, regardless of how specific and technical the subject matter is.
Okay, consult widely. That's the best way that you have diversity and perspective. Couldn't agree more. Melissa.
I think also from a user perspective, the data insecurity is one that is a concern for many. So we've been hosting some of these discussions on the metaverse and what are people's view on the metaverse and what are some of the constraints that they have to adopting these technologies. And I think it's similar with AI when it's something new. It's how will my data be used and will it be safe? And I think Mike said that they've been doing this for a long time, and yes, it is. And so I think a lot of the conversation is maybe about reinforcing that, or about just educating people in very simple terms of this is what is being used, this is why it's being used, and this is the output of it. I think that part and that education piece is really critical when we talk about data and safety and trust.
Transparency.
That's it.
Love that. Excellent. So Var, I'm going to circle back to you. How do you see organizations striking a balance between open source collaboration and protecting IP when it comes to AI?
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot. So I think open source has a lot of benefits. You can kind of co-develop, collaborate with on cutting edge work with a large global community of like-minded people, and kind of help build out that community and that movement. But we also see concerns about limiting IP rights of products developed down the line by basing them on open source. Not being aware of potential quality and security issues, which when you're dealing with healthcare is and other sensitive data it can become a really big issue. So our approach to this is kind of twofold. One is to inform regulators and provide perspectives to regulators who are looking closely at how to enable open source and how it kind of how it intersects with emerging AI regulations. So not to have a chilling effect on open source through AI regulation. And then the other way is to kind of explore the continuum between completely open and completely internal. So to form consortiums with trusted partners, with clear roles and responsibilities, a strong commitment to high quality data, and then clear IP arrangements as well, with predictable ways of collaboration. So exploring that continuum is also one way that we address this issue.
Does anyone have anything else to add? Okay, great. Let's dive into sort of the patient aspect. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Magesh. How do you see AI complementing human work in healthcare, especially in areas like diagnostics and treatment planning?
I think I can see a couple of major areas where there are interesting use cases being developed. For example, surgical robots for non-invasive procedures, a simple procedure which can be done through surgical robots easily. For example, on handling tumors which can be easily treated, say for example for a sports person. And the second thing is on personalized medicine services. For example, depending on the climatic conditions, patient's health conditions, and continuous monitoring of patients to provide customized drug services for the patient, so that it cannot be like overdosed or underdosed at a particular period of time, and it doesn't require a constant medical support through humans, but can be managed easily with AI services through personalized services. So behind the scenes, there will be a lot of analytics that can go, for example, on smart monitoring of the patient's health conditions and the various parameters required for the health related services, and based on that we can do a customized or personalized medical drug prescription for the patients. So I think these two are major area where human interventions can be minimized and AI services can be maximized in healthcare life sciences.
who would have thought that AI could make healthcare be more personalized? I mean, they seem so counterintuitive, and so you really dig into it and it goes, oh yeah, you can, again, kind of what we were touching on earlier, allowing the humans to be more human. And then I also like, Dr. Magesh, you had mentioned kind of the continuous monitoring. I think that is really key as well. I mean, so many adverse effects happen because we don't have that continuous monitoring, and we just don't have the resources for it in terms of technology or manpower. So allowing AI to do that aspect frees us to better support our patients and care. Mike, Melissa, Var, do you have anything that you want to add to how AI can complement kind of the human side and the human work? I think I saw Melissa nodding. Mike, you unmuted first, so dibs.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Dr. Magesh was just saying, and I think a really exciting thing is that becomes the remote monitoring, right? The convenience to confidently stay at home because there's technologies. I mean, this goes obviously beyond AI. This is a lot about the physical devices and sensors that are required to be able to do that monitoring, but then the AI, it can definitely play a role to interpret and look at risk scores and prognoses and the probability of something potentially going off and requiring either a clinician visit or a notification somewhere or an ambulance or whatever the case may be, right? So you can provide a lot more confidence to stay in the comfort of your home and rely less on sending people to hospitals. And I think that's going to be transformative to how we can then invest in healthcare, because a lot of what we do today funnels patients towards hospitals because that's where you've got all the resources to deal with anything that might arise. And most of the time, that stuff doesn't arise. And so you don't always need those resources at hand for every patient. So if you funnel patients less into hospitals, then you can fund a lot of other things and use hospitals, I think, for the more extreme cases that they're properly set up for. And so it can really shift how healthcare is delivered over time, and that'll benefit everybody.
To your point, Mike, there is a significant population that's resistant to going to the hospital care settings. So kind of home health, I think, helps provide better health care in general and more, again, access. Melissa, did you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna, what you were saying, Mike, about hospitals, and Kayleen, to your point about access, yes, as well. But I like the element of talking about it from a more human perspective. In developing countries specifically, I think what these health AI-based apps are actually doing is they're letting you speak in your own language. So what used to be a language barrier between maybe it's French or English, I'm thinking about Africa here specifically, and I don't speak that language. Now the app is converting it. So I'm getting someone speaking in a language that makes sense to me, and that barrier is now being excluded. And I think another one that's really important is the urban-rural divide. Yes, hospitals are generally in urban areas. The fact that I can now speak to a doctor at my home in a rural area using an application means that I don't have to go in, but it's easier for me. It's probably also more affordable as well. And so I think those are elements to it where, yes, I like the idea of it being more personal, more human-like, and I think AI has enabled that.
To continue that, I mean, you're absolutely right, Melissa. So let's continue that and let's talk about bias and fairness. Let's just start with you, Melissa, from kind of a policy perspective. So how do we ensure that AI machine learning models are free from bias or promote fairness, especially with home health and virtual care?
Yeah, I think it all comes back down to the data sets, right? So I was reading a couple of case studies that were talking about there's certain diseases which are more prevalent with certain socioeconomic groups, social and racial groups, racial ethnic groups. And if we have those divisions, how do we make sure that the data sets we're using are basically highlighting if there is, any kind of discrepancies or bias, or then compensating for that? And what is the mechanisms around that? I think that, once again, I think we spoke about transparency. I think that's important. And I think now there have been some data sets that have come together which say we've only spoke to this categorization of people and we've only had a conversation with them, and therefore this is applicable only to them. And maybe that's one solution around it. But I think it's also the question of, how accessible is it to create a data set? I'm thinking here specifically from a South African perspective. How do we as a country collate all of this information, and then how do we process it? And taking in together the rural-urban divide, there's language barriers, there's only certain types of people who can make it to hospitals. And I think that just, it makes it more complex when you think about bias. So I don't have a solution. I think I have more questions to how we get it done.
This is about a dialogue and opening conversation for a more collaborative way to move forward. So I don't think any of us really have the answers. Does anybody else have a thought on how we can promote fairness and remove bias?
I mean, it is a really tough question. And I think it's looking where we are today, historically, we've got lots of bias in data just because of the disparate access to healthcare that exists around the world. Urban-rural divide is a great example. And so then the question is, what do you do about it? And there are techniques to try and offset and understand it. And I think, to your point, if you understand the bias in the data set going in, you can deal with it as best you can and make a conscious choice about, is it something we can proceed with or not? And then how do you proceed? Do you proceed by tailoring it to a target population, or do you go collect that additional data? That gets really, really expensive and is really difficult to do given the state of health data and how it's still typically locked down in all sorts of different databases, or sometimes still paper records, depending where you go. So it can be really difficult to overcome that based on, again, the access to more modern health data systems in different parts of the world, different parts of the country. But I think it's definitely worth tackling, and it's something that I know my company, I'm really proud to say, is doing a lot to work on that, and looking a lot at real world data rather than just looking at clinical trials. We are always actively looking at how do you augment all of that insight into the efficacy and safety of a therapy by using all sorts of data sources from wherever you can find it out in real world settings, and turn that into something that is truly of clinical value.
Any last thoughts before? Oh, Var, I see you unmute.
Yep. No, I'll plus one everything that Mike just said, and it's great to see Mike and Roche leading in this space. I think that we're adding more complexity. You have healthcare and life sciences. You have different kinds of AI systems, and then as Melissa mentioned, you have urban, rural, languages, cultural issues. And so, to the extent that we can empower people to navigate that complexity, I think that building a really strong training capacity within organizations is a really key part of the puzzle. Whether that's formal education, whether that's checklists, workshops, external experts, just finding a way to build a culture of learning is going to be kind of key, because we're at the beginning of a journey. We're just going to see more complexity. And so, yeah, to the extent that we can, hopefully use generative AI to reduce or kind of simplify some of that complexity, and then also to the extent that all organizations can become learning organizations, those will serve us well in addressing this.
Learning organizations, learning groups, collaborations. I mean, it's all music to my ears, certainly. Dr. Magesh, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, actually, in terms of this AI fairness and bias, like I mentioned earlier, training the AI's services to have more diverse and representative data, make them more fair, and avoid the bias, and make more trustworthy. So I think the pre-work of creating the AI services plays a vital role in making them more successful in terms of the trustworthiness than the actual post-work of the AI services.
So it's important to consider what we put in, how we train the models, and start with the idea that we are not biased and that we're promoting fairness as we. Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I hate for our time to end, but I have asked enough questions of you, so I think it's time to shift over to our wonderful viewers. So with that, let's get started with some Q&A. Can the panelists see the questions, or would you like me to read you the questions? Oh, You ask and you shall receive. So let's start with who are all the major vendors innovating on AI in healthcare? Is this approved governing bodies already? Whoever like to take it.
Yeah, I don't know of I'm sure if you go out on the internet, there's some cool pictograph of the leading tech innovators in healthcare. There's a new one updated all the time. There is a listing of, I think, the 520 or so FDA approved AI containing medical devices. I feel like it's the Medical Futurist. I think that's Bartolin Mishko, who's assembled that and published it. So that's a nice resource to look at. I think what you see is that a lot of them are in imaging and radiology, because that's I don't want to say a lower risk, but a place where we've got lots of sophistication in the AI tools we have at our disposal. I know my company, we use it for digital pathology, so analyzing pathology slides to say, what are we seeing on the slide? What are we seeing in this MRI scan and so on. AI is really good at that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of tools that have evolved, a lot of them research use only, but some of them are approved for clinical application, I believe, as well. And then there's a handful of others in different domains as well. So that I look at that list.
Great, thanks, Mike. Does anybody else have any idea on major vendors? Melissa?
Yeah, so I think all your big companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they've all kind of partnered up with maybe health tech applications or universities, and they're looking at different technology and how it could be used. But in terms of the second question of, is there approved governing bodies already? I don't know if he's referencing this, but I think there's been talk of having a global AI regulator. And I think that's something that will possibly be discussed at the AI Safety Summit. This idea of having global principles or norms that will define how AI is created is one that is interesting, but one that I think remains to be seen if it will be implemented or not. But how that will filter down, I think, to the health sector, which will also add another complexity to it. I think, Mike, as you were saying, each country already has its own regulations for healthcare. It is already well regulated in most countries. And so it would have to be a dynamic between maybe here are the global principles and how it filters down. And I think, Var, that's what you're talking about, the verticals of it. So I think, to answer the question, I think pretty much besides big tech companies, I think just in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, healthcare is one that has been a focus for many countries and many companies. And so it is one where I think we are seeing a lot of innovation out there anyway, and rightly so, because it's probably one of the most important applications of AI.
A global regulator. We'll have to stay tuned. Next question, please. Can AI in health be trained to honor the Hippocratic Oath? Ooh. Dr. Magesh, you laughed. I'd like to hear your thoughts first.
No, I think that's out of the boundary of the AI solutions itself. Probably it's a mutual trust between the technology and the vertical solutions that is provided by the technology. So that we need to agree, and we cannot think more than that with respect to this particular Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, I think Geoffrey Hinton, who's one of the kind of pioneers of deep learning, made a prediction. If you're a radiologist, you're like a coyote that's already over the edge of the cliff but hasn't looked down yet. And over time, you've just seen like radiology become an even more complicated field with even more human intervention required to interpret and kind of work with AI tools. And so, to answer the question, no, AI cannot be trained to honor the Hippocratic Oath, and it's always going to be embedded. We should always think of it as an assistant, and think about how do we empower people to do their jobs better with AI, and then those people can honor the Hippocratic Oath. And then I'll also share a tweet for people who are interested in going down that rabbit hole. We aren't going to have time to go over it on this call, but it's just a bit of a deep dive on Geoffrey Hinton and that conversation around that.
I'm trying to find a way to share the tweet. I'm sure that Access Partnership will be able to share that with everyone. Thank you, Var. All right, next question. Thank you, Fernando. My concern is the proliferation of various virtual doctor apps offering low-cost consultations and prescribing medications without the validation of a real medical doctor. How can we prevent this?
I mean, regulation, I think, is obviously necessary. I'd say that's probably already a violation to be prescribing medication without a consultation with an actual person. I suspect that's not permitted anywhere that I can imagine. There's definitely a place for the service, but I think for the foreseeable future, that's got to be a pre-screen type of an application that says, yes, this can go to, in some places a registered nurse can prescribe antibiotics. And so a registered nurse is more accessible, and that's sufficient to have the application push you toward a registered nurse for that antibiotic, because that's 90% chance that's what it is. As opposed to pushing you toward a specialist, because maybe there's something you need an endocrinologist, because it sounds like it might be something related to diabetes or something like that. So there's definitely utility in the AI in helping with that prognosis and interpretation of the language. Definitely not in the execution or delivery of a clinical service, I don't believe. And that's where regulation really should be coming in. It actually exists, I'd say.
I'm assuming everybody would +1 that. So I think we can shift to the next question. Managing, apologies, PHI or PHI, sorry, I'm not entirely sure. Oh, see, Mike, you should have been. Mike, will you read the question for the group?
Sure. Managing personal health information are high in demand in all technologies. How regularly do we audit the system to monitor compliance and identify potential vulnerabilities? Good question. I've got some thoughts.
You did that very well, Mike, by the way. Does anybody have thoughts on that at all? No? Is it a stumper? I mean, I didn't even know what PHI was, so in all fairness. Mike, do you have thoughts?
I do. I mean, and for me, you do in real time. Ideally, you've got a system where you are constantly monitoring the use of your AI and the recommendations it's making, the performance of your recommendations, and checking against potential vulnerabilities to data leakage. All of that can be built into AI systems and the broader AI system. It's not because it's not about the algorithm itself, it's about the broader context of how the system is supported, monitored, how it's used, how the people using the system behave as a result of the system being in place. All of those things are part of the system context. And that all needs to be have really a real-time quality management system wrapped around it.
Does anyone have anything else to add to our new moderator? I think we have time for one more question. I'll take this one. Do we have a tool like Risk Manager, which we normally used in banking sectors?
I think across all industrial solutions which uses AI, like be it banking, insurance, security, capital markets, or healthcare, life sciences, having a risk manager is be an integrated part. For example, for the data privacy, data security, data governance, the risk manager and the related services is always needed, and it is an integrated service, and we cannot avoid that. Considering we have a fully mature solution. So if we want to make the solution more mature, we should have an integrated risk management services as part of all the technology solutions, particularly with AI services.
Thank you. So I think we're at the end of our time. Unfortunately, this has been a fantastic discussion. Viewers, please join me in thanking our panelists for their time and their insights. And thank you again to Access Partnership for bringing all of us together. I do believe Access Partnership is taking the liberty of recording today's session, so please connect with them to take this conversation with you, and be sure to share it with your fellow healthcare stakeholders. The entire point of this is to start a dialogue and have that transparency so that we have better access, less bias, and more fairness when it comes to bringing AI and integrating it into healthcare. So thank you again, panelists, Access Partnership, and all of our viewers for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Kayleen, for being a great moderator. It's been awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.